Hi everyone, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about, were the disciples, Jesus' disciples, really persecuted? There is some chatter on YouTube and sometimes on Twitter and other social media spots where I've heard people make the claim that the disciples weren't really persecuted. So tonight what I would like to do is provide evidence that yes, they were persecuted in a really horrific way, actually. As C.S. Lewis said, the great difficulty is to get audiences to realize that you are preaching Christianity simply because you happen to think it's true. In a conversation I had with philosophy professor Tim Grew, he asked me which place I thought starting a new religion would be successful, Mecca in Saudi Arabia or Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Given the freedom to practice religion in Milwaukee and the widespread persecution that Christians have experienced in many countries of the Muslim world, I answered Milwaukee. While Christians can freely worship in many countries of the world, especially in the West, this wasn't always the case. Prior to 313, when Constantine granted Christians legal status, they had no legal protections. Following Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, Christians were heavily persecuted, especially under Roman emperors such as Nero, who blamed them for the Great Fire in Rome. Life was not easy for the early Christians. In the New Testament, numerous reports by authors such as Luke and Paul document early Christian persecution. Acts 7:54-60 documents the stoning of Stephen, while Acts 12:2 documents the way Herod Agrippa put James, the brother of John, to death by the sword. Paul was also stoned, beaten, jailed when he documented in his New Testament books. His beheading by Nero was documented by Origen, Tertullian, and Dionysius of Corinth. The martyrdom of Jesus' half-brother James was documented by Josephus, Hegesippus, and Clement of Alexandria. Peter was crucified upside down, as confirmed by Eusebius, the first church historian, in his book Ecclesiastical History, and also by Dionysius of Corinth, Tertullian, and Origen. So there are most accepted traditions. We don't have accounts by historians for some of the other apostles. However, what we do have are traditions. Our traditions indicate that Matthew suffered martyrdom in Ethiopia and he was killed by the sword. Bartholomew was flayed to death by a whip. Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross in Greece. The cross is now known as the Cross of St. Andrew. Thomas was stabbed with a spear in India. Paul was tortured and beheaded by the Emperor Nero in 67, which we actually do have information about. Peter was crucified upside down in fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy. James the Lesser was either beaten or stoned to death while praying for his attackers. Philip was reportedly crucified upside down in Hierapolis, Turkey. In 2011, archaeologists in Hierapolis discovered what they believed to be Philip's tomb. Matthias reportedly preached in the land of the cannibals. Jesus' apostles were not the only ones to be persecuted. And I'll quote, "The first Christian martyrs to be thrown into the wild beasts died in the arena of the Colosseum, and because of these martyrs, who succeeded the gladiators, the Colosseum was venerated greatly during the Middle Ages. It was considered to be a monument consecrated to the martyrdom of the early Christians. Only for that reason was it saved. And for the same reason, the vast structure, partially in ruins but still impressive in character, is still revered by many in the civilized world today." Another quote, "Immediately after registering Marcus Aurelius' succession to Antonius Pius in 161, Eusebius reports that at the time discussed there were great persecutions in Asia, and that Polycarp was one of the martyrs of these persecutions." So I will go to the next page so you can see a scene of that. Polycarp is up there on the right. That's a famous painting of him. Before telling the story of Polycarp's arrest, torture, and execution, Eusebius makes references to the other martyrs with a summary characterization and some gory details of the barbarous treatment of these victims in this round of anti-Christian violence in Smyrna. For Polycarp was the 12th martyr in this city, all the other martyrs being from Philadelphia. Apart from Polycarp, Eusebius mentions only one other martyr by name, Germanicus, and this is quoted in Caritzis, 1968. Another quote, "According to the martyrdom of Polycarp, it was the noonday crowd at the Colosseum that reacted with uncontrollable wrath when Bishop Polycarp confessed to being a Christian. They first cried out to Philip the Asiarch to let a lion loose on Polycarp, but Philip could not do that, for the morning hunts were closed. Then the crowd cried out with one mind that he should burn Polycarp alive. This is quoted in Thompson, 2002, and I have references at Christian-apologist.com. Polycarp gazed directly at the crowd as he said, "Away with the atheists." He was soon burned at the stake. Atheist is a term that people used if you were considered non-Christians or non-pagans. Among the martyrs at Lyons was Sanctus, whose body bore witness to his sufferings, being all one bruise and one wound, stretched and distorted out of any recognizable human shape. But Christ's suffering in him achieved great glory, overwhelming the adversary and showing as an example to all the others that nothing is to be feared where the Father's love is, nothing painful where we can find Christ's glory. The slave-girl Blandina, after being tortured, was hung on a post and exposed as food for the wild beasts that were let loose on her. She seemed to hang there in the form of a cross, and with their physical eyes, they, the other martyrs, saw in the person of their sister him who was crucified for them. This is quoted again from the early martyrdom of Polycarp by Thompson in 2002. Roman Empire Decius, in 201, he ruled from 201 to 251, instituted what was considered to be the first organized persecution of Christians throughout the Roman Empire, according to Scar 1995. Prior to Decius, persecutions of Christians had been more sporadic and local. Decius required that all citizens to perform a sacrifice to the Roman gods and the well-being of the emperor in the presence of the Roman magistrate. The magistrate then issued a signed and witnessed certificate. Refusal to make this sacrifice resulted in the martyrdom of some Christians, such as Babylas of Antioch, Alexander of Jerusalem, and Pope Fabian. Others, such as Bishop Cyprian of Carthage, went into hiding. The next emperor, Gallienus, paid less attention to Christianity, so the laws went into abeyance. They were resurrected again with Diocletian, who came into office in 284. In 303, Emperors Diocletian, Maximian, Galerius, and Constantius issued a series of edicts that rescinded Christians' legal rights and required compliance with traditional pagan religious practices. That ended when Constantine, who's pictured down on the bottom left, came into office in 306 AD. Constantine restored Christians to full legal equality and returned property to them that had been confiscated. In 313, he signed the Edict of Milan, which offered Christians a comprehensive acceptance. Constantine himself had converted to Christianity when he had a vision of a Christian symbol, which helped him to win a battle and a seat as the Roman emperor. Thank God for Constantine. In the book of Acts 5:34 to 39, Luke records the prescient words of a Pharisee called Gamaliel. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, who was burned by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered that the men he put us outside for a little while. Then he addressed the Sanhedrin. "Men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do to these men." And he's referring, of course, to Peter and the apostles. Some time ago, Theudas appeared, claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed, all his followers were dispersed, and it came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census and led a band of people in revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone. Let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will find yourself fighting against God. The triumph of Christianity. In terms of world historical significance, few developments can rival the enduring impact of the triumph of Christianity within the Roman world. According to Bryant in 1993, Christianity is now the most widespread religion in the world, with over 2 billion followers. It is the only religion that is not centered around the location of its origin, and it is the only religion with an active, personal Lord who loves and forgives his children. What is also notable is to consider the Bible, which is a collection of 66 books written in 3 continents and 3 languages, over 1,500 years by 40 or more authors. The fact the Bible is so cohesive and we have no provable contradictions within it's almost a miracle in and of itself. The Guinness Book of World Records listed the Bible as the world's best-selling book. Quote, "Although it is impossible to obtain exact figures, there is little doubt that the Bible is the world's best-selling and most widely distributed book. A survey by the Bible Society concluded that around 2.5 billion copies were printed between 1815 and 1975, but more recent estimates put those numbers at 5 billion. Furthermore, the Bible has been translated into 349 languages. Such figures indicate strong support for the Bible all around the globe." William Lane Craig's website includes the following comment. "Archaeology is the greatest defender of the accuracy of the Bible. Archaeologists, when in Israel, still rely on the Bible to determine the location of sites with which reliance have proved to be remarkably accurate. Historians have long acknowledged the accuracy of place names and events recorded in the Bible despite so-called higher criticism and skepticism. In fact, the Bible is now a standard historical text for archaeologists in the Middle East, Asia Minor, which is modern Turkey, and Macedonia. The great names of archaeologists, including Dr. Flinders Petrie, Dr. William Albright, Dr. J.O. Kinnaman, Ira M. Price, Professor Sayce of Oxford, and Sir William Ramsay, have gone on record to say that archaeology confirms the accuracy and reliability of the Bible. Dr. William Albright, who is not a friend of Christianity and was probably the foremost authority in Middle East archaeology at the time, in his time, I should say, said this about the Bible: "There can be no doubt that archaeology has confirmed the substantial historicity of the Old Testament." Sir William Ramsay, one of the greatest archaeologists of all times, spent 30 years of his life trying to disprove the New Testament, especially Luke's writings. After much intensive research, with many expecting a thorough refutation of Christianity, Ramsay concluded that Luke was one of the greatest historians of all time, and he became a Christian based on his archaeological findings. Extensive evidence of the Bible's historicity exists, derived from the Dead Sea Scrolls, stone inscriptions, and archaeological findings from regions described in the Bible. In addition to the support from archaeologists, secular historians support the historicity of the Bible. For example, of a history, there's a book called The Historical Atlas, A Comprehensive History of the World. It was written by 45 academics from all around the world from very prestigious universities. The Historical Atlas states as follows: "In fact, it came to pass that Jesus' death was the foundation of Christianity as we know it. Rather than running scared, Jesus' followers grew into the thousands. The early church ran into very strong opposition in Jerusalem, and around 35 great persecution took place there. Around this time, one of the most decisive turning points in world history occurred. The early church began to accept those who were of non-Jewish origins." And they went on to say, "Despite persecutions for the next 150 years, the new Christian church spread into France, Spain, North Africa, and Mesopotamia. The once small sect devoted to Jesus Christ grew between 5 and 6 million by 300. By 350, the number of Christians in the Roman Empire was over 33 million, and Christianity had become a universal religion. In other words, between 5 and 6 million Christians were willing to worship Jesus without any legal protections in the first few hundred years. They worshiped very peacefully, unlike the early Muslims, who began their religion in war. Early in the 4th century, Constantine had a vision of a Christian symbol, which led to a battle victory, and, as we noted earlier, the legalization of Christianity. Skeptics believe the early Christians believed in Christ, but they were mistaken. They often claim they either had a vision or a mass hallucination. Does it seem reasonable to determine that millions of early Christians would risk their lives by worshiping illegally to follow a vision or hallucination by a handful of fishermen, a tax collector, and a tent maker named Paul? Furthermore, hallucinations are internal, like dreams. They aren't shared between people. It is the independently attested claims by multiple people that Jesus appeared to his disciples, apostles, and crowds over a 40-day period after his resurrection. That's what compelled early Christians. Some of the examples of his miracles I will list now. He turned water into wine. He healed an official's son without going to see the boy. He healed a crippled man on the Sabbath. He fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He walked on water. He healed a man born blind. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He healed a bleeding woman. He calmed a storm. He healed a paralyzed man. And of course, the most important of all, he resurrected himself from the dead. Paul, the author of between 6 and 13 New Testament books, offers one of the most compelling stories of a transformation. Paul was on the road to Damascus in his effort to identify and arrest early Christians for illegal worship. According to the book of Acts, it says, Saul was breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Paul said, Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Paul immediately converted to the way and became one of its most ardent followers, who ended up being beaten, imprisoned, and eventually beheaded, all in Jesus' name. In 2 Corinthians 16:26-27, Paul writes, I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have gone without food. I have been cold and naked. In 2 Corinthians 12:10, he adds, That is why for Christ's sake I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am made strong. Clearly, Paul was not living an easy life once he decided to follow Jesus. Some skeptics have argued that the early Christian disciples were mistaken, delusional, or were profiting from Christianity in some material way. Yet they failed to consider basic psychology. They also failed to consider the early disciples reaped no material rewards, no sex, no power, no money. We have no indication they were not of sound minds. They were martyred for their beliefs. Yet they were in the position to know whether their beliefs were true. For this reason, comparing them to modern-day martyrs, such as the 9/11 hijackers, is faulty. Muslim extremists believed what others had told them. No Muslims have seen the risen Allah. It says that specifically in the Quran. Consider this. People of sound minds make decisions that maximize their outcomes. They also weigh benefits against drawbacks when making decisions. The early Christians wanted to maximize their chances of going to heaven by following Jesus. Early Christians weighed the benefits of going to heaven and following Jesus against the risks of imprisonment and death. Had early Christians determined the risks outweighed the benefits and considered it all a lie, they would have recanted their testimonies in support of Jesus. Further, Jesus' chosen disciples speaks to his miracles. If I were going to start a new club or business, I would want to enlist the help of powerful and influential people. I would want support from people who had the money and visibility needed to help me get the word out. I would choose the best and the brightest. Rather than choose the powerful Pharisees, politicians, or other leaders, Jesus chose the weak. He chose fishermen, a tent maker, a tax collector, and others. He healed prostitutes, forgave adulterers, and elevated women and children. Women, who were considered second-class citizens in his time, were the first to make the most important discovery in the entire Bible, which is that of the empty tomb. Jesus went against people's expectations. Rather than appear with power, glory, and majesty, he appeared in a manger. Rather than work as an earthly king, he worked as a humble carpenter. Rather than rub elbows with the Pharisees, who were considered the most devout followers of God, Jesus rubbed elbows with the sinners. Rather than call on his followers to do great works, he has called on us to have faith in him. No other religions are quite like Christianity, which is the way, the truth, and the life. According to Jesus, he says, I have told you these things, so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. He also said this, Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, For I am gentle and humble at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Thank you so much for coming by. You'll notice over on the right in this particular screen, I also post extra biblical testimony of Jesus. With that alone, we have enough. That's all we need to show that Jesus is what he said he was, which is the Son of Man. And you can have a cross-reference on that in the book of Daniel, where it refers to the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. I hope you'll come again. I hope you'll like and subscribe. And I hope to be more active here. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.